I'm very proud to introduce Tyee reporter Katie Hyslop as the 2019 champ of Child and Youth Rights. I know she's also very proud. This is basically her version of a journalism Oscar, so this is the best it gets for Katie. Katie's reported on the health and wellness of children and youth for almost a decade at the Tyee. She's written countless stories, compassionate and detailed, on the lives of some of BC's most vulnerable residents. Her reporting ranges from intimate accounts of the experience of youth left homeless after aging out of foster care to meticulously researched multi-part series on difficult but urgent problems. One of her recent deep dives was into the crisis in Indigenous child welfare. And as many of you roomies know, probably all of you, Indigenous children are vastly overrepresented in government care. So in a series of 13 stories, Katie went way, way back to determine why this is, drilling in on how Canada created the crisis by systematically undermining Indigenous families. And she then profiled emerging solutions, virtually all of them Indigenous-led. This is also what sets Katie apart. She is solutions-focused and driven to find the people doing the work to make things better. She has what one of our colleagues describes as a chicken's eye view of the world. When approaching a story, rather than handing the microphone upwards to those in power, she looks sideways at the regular folks who rarely get a say and centers their viewpoint, like a chicken. She asks them to share their experiences, but she also invites their ideas for how to fix things. And who better really to ask? But how many journalists do this? Katie has justice in her bones. She grew up in Newfoundland, looked around at people in poverty, and wanted to know why. Her curiosity and anger about inequality has powered her ever since. Receiving this award is validating because it means that Katie is getting it right. She's putting forward the voices that matter the most, those of children and youth and their advocates, people like you, who are working to make their lives better. And I can tell you that her stories are read by the people with the means to make the change. Minister, I'm looking at you. Katie's reporting is regularly referred to in the legislature and informs the tip sheets that bureaucrats hand to their ministers each day. So thank you for honoring Katie tonight. It's wonderful that in a time when basic solid journalism must vie on the internet with twisters of facts and even fake news, that you have chosen to honor a dedicated professional who works hard to tell truths that matter, to get it right in order to make it right. Congratulations, Katie.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Robyn, and thank you, First Paul, for naming me the 2019 champion for children and youth. Thank you to the Tyee. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for this publication that's continued to employ me through thick and mostly thin times, honing me into the journalist that I am today. Not too many outlets would let a reporter put a social justice lens on their work, let alone actively support that view. I'm very lucky to work at the Tyee. This is an incredible honor. Being recognized by the people that I interview, whose reports I've poured through, and stories I've tried to amplify is, for me, a flashing neon sign that I must be doing something right. I'll be honest, I've been thinking about giving this speech for 4 months. And in that time, I have not come up with something that wouldn't sound like preaching to the choir to this room, so I apologize for that. So much of what I report on comes from the work that the people in this room do. You know the child poverty rate in BC. You know how important affordable early childhood education is. Some of you have shared deeply personal and often traumatic stories from your childhoods to help me further issues that children are still facing today in BC. I wouldn't be able to do my job without your work, so thank you, all of you. Change has been affected from your work. Both the federal and provincial governments have put more money into child benefits. $10 a day daycare is a reality for some children. Indigenous graduation rates are rising, and Indigenous youth continue to blow everyone away with their leadership in climate, treaty, environmental, housing, and child welfare advocacy, just to name a few issues. Every school district in British Columbia has a policy in place to protect queer, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, two-spirited, and other youth from bullying and harassment. That's amazing. Youth from CARE have had tuition waived at every public post-secondary in the province. But as we all know, there is still so much work to be done. This province sits, as we mentioned several times this evening, on unceded First Nations territory. And yet Indigenous kids, First Nations and Métis, make up 2/3 of the kids in care in this province. They're only 10% of the children in this province, and they're 2/3 of the kids in foster care. Their grad rates are still significantly below the provincial average. Racism against Indigenous youth and their families runs even more rampant than the poverty and the overcrowded subpar housing that is often the only option for them. There are adults out there today who are actively working to undermine the protections put in place for queer and trans youth in our schools, despite the fact that they make up a disproportionate number of homeless youth in BC and in Canada, are still more likely to be bullied, and are still being rejected by their families in 2019. All over BC, family-sized housing is rare and outrageously expensive. Subsidized childcare spots are still rare. Families on income assistance and disability still live below the poverty line, and so do those working minimum wage jobs. Special needs children are being sent home from school because there aren't enough supports to provide the education that they have a legal right to. And then there's global warming. We have 12 years to turn around a fossil fuel addicted global economy before it's too late and the youth today become much worse off than their parents and grandparents were. 10 years ago, I interned in the local newsroom, not the Tyee, to be clear. And in a conversation with an older reporter, a baby boomer, he somewhat jokingly told me, "My generation screwed up the world. It's your generation's job to fix it." I didn't show it at the time, but I was livid. In my experience, young people are often dismissed by the older generations. Dismissed as being frivolous, ignorant, parrots of their parents, their teachers, the media's, or their friends' beliefs, incapable of nuanced and intelligent thoughts. And yet, look at where the previous generations have brought us, to the brink of humanity's destruction. I'm not saying this to inflame the generational wars, but to say that instead of dismissing the younger generations until you need them to clean up other people's messes, we should start listening to them and including them now. They're already fronting our protest marches. They're already leading movements to stop pipelines or to completely recreate the child welfare system. Hell yeah. Yeah. Why not have a youth rep on every school board council? Or on every city council? Where's the youth outreach and neighborhood planning? They're the ones who are going to live there in 30 years. Are they being represented in treaty negotiations? What about in our efforts to find solutions to our ongoing housing, homelessness, and overdose crises? I say this as someone who has spent the last 8 years reporting on kids and youth by mainly talking to adults. There are some good reasons for that. Kids under 18 should have protections from the media. I understand that. But there are also bad reasons, like whoever is telling kids in care, their foster parents, and their biological families that talking to the media, which is their right, would make the system worse on them. But today I want to challenge all of us, myself included, to reach out and include youth voices in our work. Give them voting positions on your boards. Consult with them on anti-poverty initiatives. Involve them in your local area planning processes. Support their grassroots efforts and let them lead the conversation. Because what good is it for them to be the leaders of tomorrow if they have no experience in leading? I really, really appreciate this award. The people who have won it before me, Rafi, Cindy Blackstock, are true heroes. And even having my name said in close proximity to theirs is mind-blowing for me. I think my family was actually more excited about me getting to meet Rafi than anything else. But as appreciative as I am of this award, I want a future where it's not needed. Let's work together, young and old, to lift children and youth in this province to the level where they can be their own champions, champions we listen to and respect. Thank you.